Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hi, everyone. This week on the Probability Podcast, we're exploring the topic of cybersecurity and privacy from both the corporation or company point of view and also from the citizen point of view. The questions for consideration today are, can we realistically secure AI tools and platforms from bad actors? What measures are the industry delivering now to counter these threats? Are corporations ready for this? And more importantly, is the average user ready for this? Will help be coming. What do you think, Patrick?
Oh, I think that AI is enabling criminal behavior. That's what I think. Yeah, the bad guys are ahead of the curve right now. They're finding new exploits, and they're getting them out there. We've got visual deep fakes and voice deep fakes. We've got all these AI capabilities to generate, basically bad, nefarious messaging. And that is, that can lead us into some very, hot water in the end. And I know when a lot of people talk about cybersecurity, they want to instantly turn their brains off. This is for the techie guys. We don't want to even think about cybersecurity, but we do need to understand as general users what is going on the internet, on the tools we use, and what we should be doing to ensure that we are secure. And that being said, let's just talk a little bit about what's going on out there. In May, the U.S. FBI issued a warning about cyber criminals utilizing AI to basically increase their speed of their attacks, the scale of their attacks, and the automation capabilities of their attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that they are able to utilize tools to basically do everything faster, in a broader sense. And these are all just pre-warnings of capabilities. We haven't really seen everything in action yet. It takes time, right, for everybody to learn how to utilize their tools. So, so we're getting into that.
Well, certainly there's a big threat there, but also they're fighting AI with AI. We were looking at that earlier today around how even though there is a threat from AI, there are companies like Palo Alto Networks that are basically advertising that they're fighting AI with AI. So certainly cybersecurity is a huge industry, big money. So even though that there's, the bad actors have the tools, I guess the quote unquote good actors also have access to those tools. So it's sort of an AI versus AI kind of fight coming to a head, and who's going to win that fight, right? Is the bigger question, I suppose.
Yeah. And the AI versus AI thing is really, and we'll get into that in a little more detail, but it's more along the commercial side than on the people side of things, the average, public user. But that being said, let's jump into what we're really dealing with from a point of view of threat. So the first one is really about social engineering automation. And that's what I consider the world of the deep fakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that social engineering is really about scripting attacks at particular individuals, and they can, through this scripting, they can obtain key information and or manage to infiltrate into a network. And the idea that if a particular, we'll call them a black hat, manages to build we'll call it a general toolkit, right? And then sell that toolkit to all their other black hat friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then they can basically utilize these tools and then, kind of automate the whole approach, and proliferate, and just like ransomware has, you know, basically umbrellaed out to all these different bad actors. Somebody wrote the original, ransomware, and then that malware was packaged up and then sold over the dark web, believe it or not. And all these other black hats took it and said, "Oh, I can make, multi hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of dollars over utilizing this," right?
We're seeing that more and more these days, right? Where companies are
Yeah,
getting hacked and having their systems held hostage, but always under the threat of, I mean, essentially locking them out of their systems, which is not good, but a lot of times threatening to release the information of their consumers.
exactly.
And that's really the big damage, right? Because that's a damage to reputation that a company can lose overnight. But on the social engineering front, I think what's most interesting there, and you mentioned sort of deep fakes and that sort of thing, is that it can become even more convincing. So we've dealt with, probably for a long time now, we all get sort of spam messages, right? Personal ones that are trying to convince us that we have a package for pickup and those types of things. We've gotten emails at work sometimes where it's someone trying to impersonate, our boss, asking to transfer money or to give, sensitive information, which, if we want to be serious, a lot of these aren't very convincing, or if you're at least a little bit savvy, they're not very effective. Even, at my last work, they had sort of a program where the company itself would send those phishing attempts, and if you, if you detected enough of them yourself, then you would get awarded a badge and that type of thing, right? Which is sort of training people to spot them. But in this
You
sort
didn't get
of
a free
era,
lollipop?
not quite.
Not quite. Okay.
But I mean, what's interesting though is that with AI, things can become much more convincing. So consider a scenario whereby now you get a call from your boss, for example, or somebody in the finance department that and it sounds exactly like them, because now we know that through AI, they can copy a voice and then have it say all sorts of things, and even through these tools make it sound sort of convincing through a certain cadence or putting pauses in and things like that. So now all of a sudden you have a scenario whereby, even if you're somewhat savvy, you could be easily fooled. And I think that's sort of where that cybersecurity meets, the impact to the average person type thing, where all of a sudden you could be implicated in doing something wrong at work, or you could be giving somebody your own personal information, or sending money, or doing different things. So what do you think in terms of, how can people get a little bit more savvy towards that?
Well, it's definitely true what you're talking about. I mean, these tools allow, the black hats to cross beyond, the language barrier, right? And do it well. So, they can have fairly well crafted messaging. And then, you know, they can also respond pretty dynamically with individuals once they engage, right? They can utilize their AI tools to come back with responses. And, you don't have that, telltale, you know, poor diction and bad grammar and that whole bit, right? So it sounds very authentic. Now,
Mm-hmm.
never mind the fact we haven't really got into, spoofing web calls and stuff like that, right? I mean, there's where things get really interesting when you look at, taking a picture of an individual and then fully automating them and making them say things. That's the idea of a deep fake, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've all seen, famous individuals, president, that kind of thing. They're saying things, but they're not. This is all fake, right? So that's where we're looking at is really, we're going into really dangerous territory, right? With this idea of getting sample sizes of audio and video, and then being able to create these very convincing images and video that and soundtracks that ultimately sound very authentic, but are completely generated, and these can be generated for nefarious reasons. It's a situation, which you go back to the original work being done on the AI side, and you scratch your head, and you say, what are you guys thinking? Why are you rolling this type of technology out? What can you possibly think the use case is here, right? And sure, there's different companies are looking at this and saying, well, we're going to try to manage this. We're going to try to label, watermark uh, the, uh, the individual output of this, so everybody knows and it's clearly delineated that this is AI output. But that's not everybody, and that's to extent not being exercised properly and well. There's not a lot of government litigation around this, or sorry, government legislation around this, and yeah, there's not a lot of litigation around this to drive culpability and new laws, right? So that's where we get into trouble, I think. And
the
the black
laws being
hats,
able to keep up. Yeah.
yeah, the law's not able to keep up. There's no, we have no precedents, right? And somebody's got to get into a situation where they've lost a lot of money, or somebody's been harmed in a significant way before something gets changed. So not one of those particular scenarios. So black hats, they're basically utilizing AI to code their little nasty little surprises, and they're utilizing their co-pilots and uh, other tools to rapidly respond when somebody does respond to them. So the door has been open. Now the other side of this too is not just on engagement side. We also look at it from what kind of tools they can write. For instance, with Codex and GitHub, they have their AI components now, where essentially a novice programmer can develop some fairly involved tools very quickly, and basically develop these 0-day hacks, these bots, any malware they want to chase after, and put out there. They can do it, and they can do it quickly. Where before they actually had to write this stuff. So we're enabling that as well. So there's lots of different areas where we're speeding up, the criminal faction.
Well, yeah, and if you have AI being more autonomous and being able to write code, then it can essentially sort of shapeshift, either to avoid detection or to come up with new attacks based on some sort of security measure put in place. This whole idea of AI versus AI, ultimately, it's which one is going to win is really up for grabs, right? If you think about a couple episodes ago, we talked about super intelligence and AGI, and sort of what happens when you combine a super intelligence with the idea of cybersecurity attacks and that type of thing, right? Because as fast as you can counter what it's doing, it's like I said, shape shifting or changing what it's doing sort of on the fly, which sort of will make things really interesting. So we're already seeing some challenges in this area, but if we reach super intelligence, that's where things are going to get really interesting,
But even when they implement, AI management, AI control, AI response, that's that can be fairly narrowband stuff. And from that perspective, we're not talking about deeply involved intelligence there, but even some, basic intelligence, which the generative AI can provide, is enough, right? The other thing we got to consider too is the rapid onset of smart devices in our world, right? We're and those are old targets as well. So your doorbell, think about all the, not just the security systems for all your different cameras, but think about your baby monitors, anything else, smart fridges, thermostats, what have you. So
Most of us have a smart speaker in our house, right? Like
smart speakers, yeah,
Alexa, an Apple HomePod
that's
or
right.
something of that nature that is essentially always on, because anytime I need to interact with it, I just sort of say the keyword and it jumps into action, which means it's always listening. And so when these things infiltrate that, will it be able to collect information that can then be used in an attack or a phishing attempt or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And when you have that, that type of, we'll call it packaged malware that is introduced with this device, there's been cases where you buy the device and it was introduced at the factory, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the distributor. And it's, it's already compromised. But, the idea that, when you get these devices and even after you implement and start using them, you just simply don't know. You don't know what's happening with that they are actually compromised, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that gets it into our from a people point of view, the average person, how are they able to harden a network? Are they able to see this? And the problem to that, or the answer to that, which is the problem of, is usually no. Um, and then we get into situations where we look at the bigger problems, which are really fun because you see them on movies, right? We're going to hack somebody's car and drive them off a cliff or something like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so infiltration of smart devices goes up to the next level there, and it's definitely safety that's a primary concern. But the other side of it is cell phones. Um, when you get into looking at those particular devices uh, that are very, we'll call them multifaceted in their capabilities. There's many different introduction points. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, and also if you think about, smart devices and everything else, that might be at a personal level, that might be troublesome, but think about how many other things are connected now, or, electricity grid, airlines, all the other bigger things that we're connected to, that are certainly targets, for bad actors. And, this sort of idea of digital warfare can be taken to a whole new level, where all of a sudden you have sort of critical infrastructure or services, shut down or compromised or held hostage, for
Yeah.
example, right?
Yeah. That's getting into the scary side of things when you think about warfare as enabled through an AI. But we're still at the beginning phases, the introductory phases of AI. A lot of people don't even understand how far it can go and what it can do just yet, right? We're still learning, and there's a lot of concern raised about AI being able to break encryption, for instance. Now, encryption is the foundation of privacy, right? And encryption is the foundation of being able to have, uh, buy products online, right? Your HTTPS sites, right? You've got to have that, that TLS encryption available in order to be secure. You don't want to be able to, share your credit card online, for instance. Um, so there's lots of different components to encryption and different levels of encryption. Encryption is used on your Wi-Fi network, right? It's used to, in some cases, to protect your emails going back and forth. You encrypt critical files before you send them, and the receiver then unencrypts them, and that keeps your sensitive data secure, whether that be, utilizing WinZip or some other, more advanced, email service. But there's, this is the very foundation of your own ability to protect your own data. And there's lots of questions being raised. Well, AI can break that. Well, they haven't been able to. AI has not been able to, as yet, break the encryption side of things. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be able to in the future, in some respect, because AI is ultimately good at patterns, so it may figure out something that we haven't yet anticipated, and somehow compromise a particular protocol or something like that to a certain degree. So that's still out there. Sure, the real danger to encryption really is related to quantum computing, which we'll talk about in some other later episode. But that's not
a whole other
reality.
topic.
That's a whole topic on its own.
It's that combination of quantum computing and being able to break encryption that, both those things together could spell real disaster. But then on the other side, could sort of AI in these systems be used to increase, encryption, improve it, build upon it? Now, I guess you could argue
That's
that,
right.
if it could be used to build upon it, then it could be used to break it, perhaps. But I don't think it's a completely two-way street there. For example,
You raised a good point on that. When you think about it, like as we evolve, the idea is you're trying to stay ahead of the game from a point of view of the negative side with the positive side. So I'm sure we'll be able to utilize AI tools to help us build better security models. That being said, let's talk about another issue with security and or your privacy, where when we have these embedded AI chips right now on your PC, we'll call them NPUs, what they label them as, instead of CPUs, and they have it can effectively profile user activities and report any of that information to a particular vendor. And that information that's being sent or transmitted can be defined by what's on that chip. What gets sent can be defined what's on that chip. So really what we're talking about here with these NPUs is Big Brother, right? Big Brother on the chip, and it's the end of privacy as we know it on that particular type of device. And anything you enter on that, any data you may enter into that device, or pull in or whatever from another storage device, that information now comes into contact with that NPU, and that information now can be pre-encryption be sent over to a listening device. So there's a lot of concern about that.
So for the average, the non-techie person, then, a lot of us have heard CPU, right? Central Processing Unit. That's sort of the brain of your computer.
Yep.
People may have heard GPU, which is graphics processing. So what is an NPU for the non-tech audience?
Yeah, that's basically your what they call neuromodulated or modified
neural processing unit.
Yeah. You basically have embedded, deep learning capabilities on the chip itself, and effectively, if you really scale that up, it has amazing potential. But by embedding, these particular AI components, there's a lot of unknowns right now. But what that really does from a point of view of privacy and and control. So I
Mm-hmm.
I know they're really, everybody's putting these up as the latest and the greatest, and it's going to be the tool that's going to help you get things done. But I'm a little dubious right now on the other side of it and what is actually being you know communicated back. And not that I have any concern about privacy, but I don't sign up for the state of we'll call it being monitored. I don't agree with that. Now,
Yeah, well, I think we're sort of in an era where that's sort of inevitable, right? And
yeah,
people have given up their privacy largely for convenience, or sort of access to
yeah,
things, right? I have the Apple HomePod, in my home, and I know it's there and I know it's listening, and but it provides a convenience for me. I can look up things. I can have it play music. I can, check on the weather. I can turn my lights on and off. There's all these things I can do with it, and ultimately, I don't feel like I have anything to hide. And that was always my attitude. But now I wonder, in this new age of, sort of everything becoming ubiquitous as far as data just becoming part of what's available on the internet. What does that ultimately mean? Like, for example, I just had an email from Ticketmaster about this massive hack that happened with Ticketmaster through a third party that's basically said my information was compromised and gave me, a free year of TransUnion to monitor whether my information has been stolen and used for nefarious purposes, which certainly, made me think twice about things in terms of, privacy and that type of thing. I just heard that Google is making this tool available for everybody that allows them to see whether their data is on the dark web, for example. So I think that definitely people have to become a little more aware and vigilant. Whether they will relies on how much they're willing to sort of lock things down and forgive or forgo convenience for the sake of privacy is a big one. These AI tools are being integrated into everything we use, right? Whether people are intimately aware or not, they will be interfacing with these systems. And ultimately, what's going to happen is that they're going to unwittingly give information, personal information, identifiable information. It could be in terms of where they're banking or where they work and all these things, right? And even on the company level, we've at my last company they had warnings about putting information into something like ChatGPT that it now consumes and now can learn more about your company, where another company could use it for competitive analysis and maybe get access to information that they shouldn't, right? So I don't think we're fully, I think, back to the idea of forgiving or giving up, sort of privacy or security for convenience. I think we're already seeing that happen at a fairly large scale. And just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of the implications of that and how people might start to think differently about that.
well, I hope people do start thinking differently about that, but I really believe they won't. Um, it's about how it's about, like you said, about convenience, right? It's about hiding or not managing or not dealing with the complexity of these devices and what they're capable of. It's the same thing as, why do people use password for their password? It's ridiculous, right? So there's going to be a large portion of the population that won't really pursue this. They won't think it's important to them until their identity gets stolen and their credit cards are maxed out and their credit is not anymore good, and they have to deal with that mess that takes them a year to deal with, right? And
Hmm.
ruins their ability to buy the house or the car or whatever. Those things happen, and those with those concerns there, we cannot always anticipate the what if it's going to happen to you or not, and a lot of people are just gambling, right? When you
Yeah.
get into this type of stuff, you should have your eyes open. Right? You should you should make sure you lock down your personal router with a proper password. For instance, you should have your phone locked with a pin or your fingerprint or whatever. These are just common things that you should do to try to protect your sensitive data. The other side of this, of course, is which is a kind of a different way of looking at it, is falling down that trust, funnel, and getting caught up in what we call the threat of explicit reliance. So we get to a point where we just say, yeah, let's have the AI tool manage that and control that, and we don't really, we see something that the tool provides to us, and we don't question it. We just explicitly say it's okay and move on. And that's a bit of a danger too, because these are just like any other tool. They can have, provide inaccurate information, right? They can give you incorrect data, and that requires you to think critically about what you're doing with these tools.
Yeah, I think sometimes people have a false sense of security, right?
Yeah.
For example, we talked about, the idea that people can produce deep fakes and these types of things, but think about the security measures we have right now, right? I mean, when things, when computers first came about, right, everything was secured by the password. And then eventually the password became a less secure option because of sort of how hackable it was, unless you created, a crazy long password and this type of thing. But even then, even that has its limits. So then we brought in something like two-factor authentication, right? And where you get, say a text message with a code. And now we're learning that, well, that's not really secure because people can do this emulating your SIM card type thing, and they can intercept those messages and still break in. And now we're moving to, authenticator apps and this type of thing. If you look at, even our devices. So if I think about, my Apple devices, some of them use a fingerprint. So when I first go to set up the device, I'm essentially scanning my entire fingerprint into this device, right? And then, in terms of my phone, it uses the Face ID recognition. So it's also scanning my face in. In fact, it's actually pretty good in that it can, it'll actually detect it in fairly low light if I'm wearing a hat. Like it's pretty smart. So we're getting into that area of biometrics, which was sort of pitched to us as an extra level of security, right? Because if I'm using my fingerprint over my phone or my face, well, other people don't have that. But now, I think there's two things. Number one is if that biometric identity information gets out there in the dark web, now people have that. Could they replicate that to access the things that you think you've secured through that? That's sort of an interesting angle to think about it. It's almost that double-edged sword where we've implemented these things in the name of security, but now could they be used for other purposes? For example, even if the fingerprint is foolproof, the face identity could someone use a deep fake to bypass that, right? There's increasingly a lot of security systems that are leaning towards the biometrics, but then now AI might mean that those are actually maybe even less secure, or maybe it's not the right option. So what do you think in terms of that type of thing, whereby things that we think are giving us an advantage are actually putting us at a disadvantage?
Yeah, I would agree with you there. When you look at especially facial recognition, that's a bit dubious. There's been cases where this has been defeated quite easily with the help of AI, generating specific images, right, off, other media. So when you think about different levels of technology, whether that be a fingerprint, whether that be a iris scan, other types of recognition. I mean, they talked about. I've seen cases where they actually talk about your breath and stuff like, but that's we're getting into some pretty high levels of security there, where you do multi finger handprints and that kind of thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
The idea there is that, sure, they're ensuring that that particular individual has access via that method, but then that information now is on in storage, and that information now could be used somewhere else if it's captured. Is it
If it gets
encrypted at rest?
compromised, then
Yeah, yeah, we're in trouble, right? So that goes back to the trust, right? We trust, and if you look at your ticket master, that's just the tip of the iceberg of how these bigger corporations have been really doing a lackadaisical job at security, and we're paying for it because that information, that personal information, it's not just our credit cards, right? Which we just get another one, right? But it's also, I mean, you've heard of this more than a few times, I'm sure, about information that's related to patients, right, in the medical health field. This is no joke now, right? So this information now is getting very sensitive and very personal. And with that, sure, you can do identity, but you can also grab that information and utilize that information to access your accounts, right? And this is where it gets really scary. The aspect of profiling, where you can use an AI tool to profile, grab everything off social media, everything off any other area on the web, plus any kind of dark web information, and profile a particular person to target them, right? And what that really means now is, you have the capability not only to, uh, you uniquely guess with high probability what certain passwords are, and access those devices. You're looking at, more often than not, we have to keep certain key numbers, pins and that kind of thing. We're able to utilize that information in our daily lives because we've come across those particular combinations before. And well, you get asked what's your mother's maiden name and things like that for security questions, for instance. That information now is present, right? It's part of the profile. This all could be anticipated. So that's pretty scary stuff, right? And then you package this all up and you say, yeah, we now have a whole tool set to target this individual. There's
you can get that 360-degree view of them, right?
Yeah.
That essentially, when you think about it, they can, these AI, data collection, quote unquote, tools, have long sort of tentacles, right? And that they're scraping information off the web. So any information that exists about you on the web that's public, right? They can get access to that. We just talked about the biometric data, which is actually irreplaceable. So if your biometric data was compromised, then you would no longer be able to use any of those systems that were that rely on that, or you'd have to find another way to secure those systems. You mentioned IoT earlier, right? Where you have all these devices in our homes that are basically, if they were compromised, they're creating that, stream of information about our habits and daily behaviors. And then, of course, you have social media, which, I mean, some of us, are not fully, engulfed in that world, and maybe we have that somewhat locked down. But a lot of people are living their lives publicly on social media, right? Through, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and so on. That can capture lots of things: demographic information, location information, your emotional state, all without your consent in a sense, right? Because I mean, I guess ultimately you've consented because you've put that out there. So I guess what I'm saying is that we've sort of entwined digital entities in our life to where there's a lot of information actually available. Now, some of it might be behind some sort of, password or other security system, but as people or systems begin to gather all those different aspects of our lives through all these systems and devices and interactions, the potential for for that identity theft, I think, grows tenfold. And while for the average person, that might mean, for example, some sort of financial implication or something like that. For other people, it's actually quite a lot more troublesome, right? So think about, a politician that happening, and the kind of access to things that they have, or the people that have access to nuclear bombs, or you can really take it to really scary places. But ultimately, there are people with a lot of power and access to power and other things in this world that if they get compromised, the implications are much further reaching, because the kinds of things that they can use that for will impact all of us. So I think while there's a sort of a personal, identity theft angle on, how can it impact me as an individual who's, the average guy who's got a job and everything else, I think that the implications are far more reaching than that, in the
Well, I
sense
agree.
of
I mean, you
community in
look
the
at,
world, right?
well, the idea behind personal, you know, personal protection. An individual may have all the advantages, in a particular corporation for protecting their identity, but then they come home and they
Mm-hmm.
utilize their systems at home, right? The You think about all those tools we use every day: email, social media platforms, the web communication platforms like Zoom and Skype and Google Meet. All these tools are essentially we're trusting the vendors to ensure that they have adequate security measures on them, right? And they've implemented adequate security measures. The idea that that trust can be totally conveyed to them is, I think, is a little bit naive, at least based on the past. We're sure they're doing their best, and sometimes their best just doesn't hit the mark, right? Uh, from that perspective, I would say that their ability, these particular platforms, and their ability to manage the oncoming wave of AI-driven security risks, I would say they're going to be behind the eight ball just like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And certain platforms are going to be, have worse responses than other ones. And this means that if you've got an account there, no matter what platform it is, sorry, you can't really tell which one's going to be the one that's going to have the multi-billion-dollar or billion user hit there, but one of them's going to suffer that, and that information now is your information. It gets put out to be utilized on the dark
Yeah, I
web.
think it's going to open up whole new industries as well. We talked, a previous episode of this podcast about, the potential for jobs to be lost. But, you can certainly, based on everything we've talked about today, you can certainly see that there's, the idea of cybersecurity. People think about it in terms of the corporation, but for the individual, I think is going to be a huge concern. Again, people don't tend to think about it until it happens to them, but I think people are going to start seeing it happen a lot more to them. And so you might see industries that are offering those, which I'm sure some are already available, but that offer you some sort of AI driven thing to help protect you online and protect your identity and protect your access to things, and also scour sort of the dark web and let you know if you've been compromised, because I think that's the challenge. Oftentimes you don't know that you have been compromised, you know I had, a couple of years ago, all of a sudden, my credit card was being used somewhere online, and I never could figure out where somebody got a hold of my credit card because I felt like I was pretty careful with it. But I actually didn't know about it, until my credit card company called me. So I wasn't being as, vigilant as I should be. So I think that, it's on the individual, but I also think it's sort of on, corporations as well. So, thinking about that, how can, let's look at it from both angles. How can corporations start, do you think, tackling this, like maybe like a little bit more proactively?
Well, the reality here is that a lot of corporations are still struggling with understanding what they actually need to do. There's cost to all of this. This is not cheap. When we look at redefining or implementing new levels of security, there's licensing fees, there's the implementation fees, and then the training and the ongoing training of staff and the people that are taking care of the product. And of course, when you think about those costs, those are embedded costs, right? You're not making money with those costs. That's the cost of doing business, right? So
It's an overhead,
there's a
yeah.
big there's a big pressure right there. Or if you're a company that's not and totally in the black, well, what are you going to do? Certain things get cut, right? Priorities, and with that, you're running risks, right? With your with poor security models. So what can what kind of dangers are we dealing with first off on the company side? First thing is, of course, awareness, and that's awareness I've talked about just recently was executive leadership, understanding how they're going to balance this out, how much money they should put to it, how big is the problem. It's a balance of managing risk. The other one is awareness for employees and that ongoing training and ensuring that they understand what security concerns there are out there and what are the best practices and what they should do and what they should be looking for, being aware. The other thing is you don't think about it too much, but we all bring our own cell phones into the workforce, into the work arena. And what's interesting there is if you think about industrial espionage, right? Those devices can be utilized to grab critical information. Now, that's not always the case. I mean, we're not always in a situation where that is, but the idea is that you could be utilizing and taking information that you're exposed to at work and entering that information into, let's say, your handheld Gemini, AI because you have a question, but you're actually divulging critical information onto a public forum at that time. So that's not a good thing, right? Also, data protection. This is something that organizations have been struggling with forever. Is first off classifying data, what's critical, what's sensitive, and what is absolutely kind of we have to protect it, top secret, so to speak. It's very critical to the company. Building a prioritization scale of data, and then having measures to protect that each of those repositories of data. And for instance, if you think about, I may have a client's name and address, right? That's one thing. But if I have the client's name and address and I have all their information related to everything that they've purchased, that's another level of critical information. And do we indeed, as a corporation, put extra measures in protecting what we consider sensitive and critical. So
Mm-hmm.
that's another component to what has to be controlled, but also identifying leaks of that information. The other thing is really having, if you're looking at AI, really having very clear use cases defined around what that tool is going to be and how it's going to be used, what information is going to be put into it, and what the risks are regarding that. It's one thing to jump into an AI implementation project and say, oh, well, let's just see what we can do with this. But it's another thing to look at it from a point of view of what the risks are and how the data around that AI tool needs to be protected. We also
Mm-hmm.
need to consider employees, and I kind of alluded to this, employees being compromised outside the walls of the organization. That can happen, right? And that information now can be used to, blackmail employees and that kind of thing. And now we have, the espionage situation that could be happening. There's also intellectual property protection. So there's a lot of different concerns and risks for
Yeah,
corporations,
absolutely.
right?
I think that, you touched on something there around companies increasingly integrating AI, models and platforms into their offerings, right? And even if they're not a software maker, for example, they could have a chat bot on their, website. So that tends to be a big trend, right? I can hardly go to a single website these days without a bot popping up in my face asking me if I could be helped today. Initially, those were fairly innocuous, just sort of scanning the website. Now they're more like AI driven. And there's been cases of them being compromised and sort of jailbroken or, in different ways, so that now all of a sudden you have this bot that's giving responses back that it's actually damaging to the company. So like from a competitive point of view, people could do that to cause a negative reputation. There's been companies that have had to take bots off their sites because it's been spewing all kinds of crazy things. So I think like the models themselves aren't really secure yet. And we've even seen instances of, where, say ChatGPT has been sort of broken to the point where, they say, well, this, OpenAI will claim that, well, this model is built so that it won't do X, Y, and Z. And some people have figured out fairly easily how to like circumvent that with 3 or 4 prompts to get the model to start spouting all kinds of like conspiracy theories and crazy things and really, nefarious things as well. So I don't think we understand these models well enough. So I would say that, corporations need to tread somewhat carefully, like you said, around what is the use case for using AI? How are they incorporating it? What model they're using, and how secure is that model? So, because once the genie's out of the bottle, it's hard to kind of put it back in. And now you have every company rushing. I mean, you almost can't go to a single company putting out some sort of like technology or software product that doesn't have AI splashed across their site, right? Everything's got an AI feature now.
Yeah,
But what does that really mean from
yeah,
like a
that's true.
security and privacy point of view, which I guess sort of leads me to like the idea about what about the individual? Because we talked about this a little bit earlier, but what else can we do as sort of individuals to be a little bit more vigilant? I know, like as far as um, we're looking at more AI because we're in the industry, but I think we also have a personal interest in how is it impacting us on a day-to-day basis. But what do you think as far as about the individual and what they could do to help better protect themselves?
Well, definitely we can do more than what we're doing today. Um, and I can walk through some different ideas, for instance, to help with that. One of the key things, if you look at what commercial organizations do, they utilize some fairly impressive tools, and those tools are now AI augmented, right? And what they do basically is they will monitor the network. They will monitor the devices. They will be able to respond and respond very quickly to a concern, right? And the idea is, can they identify the concern? Can they identify the suspicious behavior and do that accurately or not? Right. That's always been the challenge. And then the more accurate you can be, right, the more automated you can do the response, right? So when you think about, your the company you go to work at, they'll have thousands and possibly millions of dollars invested in security systems that are countering AI because they have AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what do? You go home to your own home network. What is your home network? And this is where things get very interesting. Basically, your home network is a router, right? And you've got your printer and your different computers, maybe a media box, everybody's cell phone, all connected through to this WAP or wireless access point that's embedded into your router. And these particular routers, interestingly enough, hopefully I don't scare too many people here. A lot of these routers are provided by the ISP, right? So your home network is an extension of their network. They have full access to your network, okay? They own that particular box that is the router and the firewall and basically managing your network, okay? The other side of this is you can have situations where the ISP says you buy your own router, you buy your own, box if you to manage your network communications. That is actually more optimum, and what that provides you is the ability now to go out and buy a later technology router and be able to. That's really, and I'm saying router, but it's a combination box. It's a switch, it's a firewall, and it's also a antivirus component, right? An antivirus, and we'll say antivirus meaning the ability to monitor and act on malware. You can also, it's also a component that you can configure your network on. And what I found in my personal experience is that it's quite, these home routers of today, they need to improve considerably yet on the user interface. They need to provide better security models. They need to be able to allow a typical user, a home user, to really define how tight they want their security to be. Also, they can introduce, an AI level of processing there that can help you guide you through a lot of these configuration options, right? And also respond and monitor and alert you when something's wrong. An example I could give you would be somebody connects up to your particular home network, whether it be wireless or wired. When they connect, they have a piece of malware, right? Now, it's a common practice in networking to isolate networks, create compartments on the network. And within that compartment, only, these individuals or these devices are allowed within this compartment. And within that compartment, you also have controlled input output. Only this messaging goes out or this messaging goes in. And you build, a whole collection of these different compartments, these subnets, and you manage security that way. So if you have a problem in one area, it doesn't propagate out to other areas. The other thing you can do is look at it from an onion point of view. You can have a subnet within a subnet, so you can protect, you think about, the icing in the Oreo cookie. You want to protect that, the juicy part. So you've got this concentric circle, and you're building this security model around that. Now, when you think about your home, right, it's basic. We don't have that ability to build out. We have a guest network, right? Now, okay, we have a guest network. So somebody attaches and they have malware on it. They should be immediately shunted to the guest network. So they cannot see any of the devices in your home network, period. Right? Think about it if they have ransomware. So there's a ransomware on this computer. It gets connected to your network. The first thing ransomware does is tries to propagate out to everywhere else and basically encrypt all that information on your network, right? Now, if you have a smart device for security, it's going to automatically push that device into the guest network and shut down all access to your internal network. No,
well, that's where something like AI could come in, right? Like AI could proactively determine what it is, isolate it, that type of thing. I think the biggest challenge is that for the average person, even when you start talking about, securing networks and subnets and things, it's just sort of like, goes way over their heads. So I do think the responsibility, even though on a personal level, there are things that you can do at a base level to try and secure your information and your accounts and that type of thing. But on a sort of access level, I think it's on both, the device manufacturer side of things, but also on the ISP level, right? The people that are providing you the routers and those types of things. And right now it seems like it's fairly, I don't know. I just deal with one company, but it's a bit lackadaisical in terms of, when I got my setup here in my house, that the default password that they assign to it, which is interesting, comes up on my devices saying weak security. In other words, this whole network and this router and whatever else, it's all weak security. But I'm like, well, shouldn't it be secure by default? So it's a bit of a failure on the provider side, which is where I think some of the onus falls. Now, it makes you want to go and read your contract with your ISP and say, well, if something happens, who's really culpable here, right? Typically, like I looked at this in terms of, litigation, in terms of software laws and that because I've worked for software companies whereby we had to look into this, and it basically said that because even though the person using the software may have created that vulnerability, we're actually partially culpable because we've provided something that say has a trapdoor somewhere in it, right, or an open door that. And so I think that while there is responsibility, on the individual, I do think ultimately the responsibility lies on the corporate side of it, on the provider side of things. And I think that because I think they're best equipped to be able to, sort of help in those sort of situations.
The other side of it, of course, is protecting your endpoint, which is your computer, which you should have any malware software, which any virus, right? But also having your virtual firewall running, even on your home network. The idea being that as time grows, these virtual firewalls will become more and more smarter, and they'll be able to do some immediate response in the case of detection of malware. So I do see those layers getting smarter too. So, if you have a really old machine, it's not being updated, it's going to be an insecure machine. That's it. But as you go through and buy later equipment, and it'll be able to run the later software, and you'll have, more secure solutions out there. There's also another interesting one, which I wanted to throw out there. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but the home security systems are benefiting greatly by integrating AI, because what they now have is the ability to integrate all these different types of detectors, COT, fire, natural gas, even water levels, and then incorporate all that into the alarming and response systems, which the AI can oversee. Uh, there's another interesting level which the technology is utilizing, which is Wi-Fi sensing, where they're able to track people moving throughout the home using, because with Wi-Fi, you can actually, with a Wi-Fi signal that from your broadband, you can actually utilize that sensing to understand where individuals are throughout the home. It's fairly recent, uh, discovery, but it's now being implemented. So you don't have any blind spots. For instance, if the home is supposedly empty and then somebody breaks in, there's no blind spots, right? There, and that particular device can trigger an alarm, and the idea of false positives have dropped tremendously because this equipment is now going through, that filtering by the Wi-Fi. So there's that whole idea about threat detection and predictive analytics and all that is gone up a huge, magnitude. Uh, and of course, with that, you can now have a lot of us rely on, our locked doors or maybe our pets um, to act as, security components. And when we go to the security system, we find out first off, you're not going to connect that to any form of emergency service because unless it's the actual alarm system, because so many false positives, there's so many problems with utilizing that alarm system. So a lot of those sensitivity issues are being addressed through AI. So it's interesting, really, when you think about it, what other channels of security can be improved on.
Yeah, that's sort of the positive aspect of AI, right? Because we sort of started off today talking a bit more about on the threat side of things, but certainly, the technology provided on the AI side of things can certainly help on the security side of, as well. So it's, from that perspective, I think there's definitely some hope to be had, I think, as well, because certainly in the wrong hands, AI can be used for nefarious purposes, but certainly it can be used for a lot of good, like even some of our long-standing practices around trying to secure things with passwords and even two-factor, and these things are easily thwarted. But now AI gives us all these other opportunities to be even more secure, even more protected, if we choose to do so. But just wanted to bring it back to some of the questions that we originally talked about and tried to come to some consensus on. So one of them was, can we realistically secure AI tools and platforms, from bad actors? And, we talked about some of the measures the industry is taking now. I think it seems like, the consensus was basically that, it's going to be an ongoing battle, right? It's not a singular kind of yes or no. Can we realistically secure? Well, perhaps we can secure it this week, and maybe next week with some sort of advancement we can't. Or when we reach that point of super intelligent AI, now we're facing a whole different level of threat, but potentially that can be used for a whole different level of protection as well, right? So I think that from that point of view, I think we've sort of come to the consensus that it's just going to be an ongoing type battle. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to be an uptick. We're going to see it. Would it be a significant uptick in this, these compromises and information being, sensitive information being, sent out to the open network? I would say there's going to be an uptick. Is it going to be considerable? I'm not so sure. I think a lot of the commercial offerings out there are upgrading, and it's really about the companies to get on that bandwagon and upgrade their licenses and upgrade their products, to ensure that they're protecting their networks. So it's hard to crystal ball to say for sure. But I would say there's definitely going to be an update. How much? I'm not sure. Right.
Well, things are moving fast, right?
Yeah.
So it's really we're in a bit of an unpredictable state, but because of how fast things are moving, I think the other question we talked about was, are corporations ready for this, and is the average user ready for this? And I think corporations are getting more ready by the day, but we're also seeing a lot more incidents of infiltrations and compromised networks and systems happening more often. It seems like it used to be a little bit more of a rarity that you'd see a large data breach or a company being held hostage. And now it seems like almost every week we're seeing something in the news. So I think, I don't know if they're ready for it right now, but I think they're very quickly getting ready for it. On the average user side, I think we've largely determined the average user is not ready, right? That
Yeah.
we've sort of entrenched ourselves into this digital life, and that we sort of take a bit of a lackadaisical attitude towards security. I think we assume that a lot of the things we're using are secure by nature, or that we're not really a target, or that it won't happen to us. And I think that's probably the larger one, right? That
Yeah.
we never think these things are going to happen to us because we're not a celebrity or a politician. But the truth of it is we're all vulnerable, and we all need to stay vigilant ultimately, or we're going to be at the same risk as the corporations. Or if we assume that the corporation has our best interests in heart, then perhaps we're being a bit naive as well, and that
Yeah.
we need to think a bit more about this. But it's ultimately going to mean a lot more education. I'm not sure who's going to do that education, whether it's going to be the government or private companies. But I think that even if you're not tech savvy, I think that you need to be educated on the potential sort of threats that are on the horizon.
Yes,
for sure.
for sure. And I didn't get all the way through my checklist here, so I'll be quick here. The first thing would be, everywhere you can turn on multi-factor authentication for your logins to your accounts, do it. Right? Don't use passwords, use passphrases. So what I mean by that is something that's 15, 16 characters or over. Like the cow jumped over the moon, right?
Yeah.
You could turn that into the Timex jumped over the elf or something like that. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but the idea is now you have passphrase and you're using a very long string of characters, and then you can throw in some special characters in between, and that you can remember that, right? It's easy to remember passphrase, especially if you throw in a few accents as well. So try to get into that. I know it's a lot more typing, but in the end, you're protecting your information. Also, like we had talked about, lock down all your devices. Lock them down with secure and strong passwords, passphrases, and make sure that you're updating those devices. You can go to your router tomorrow if you have your own router and say, go on the administration side of things and do a check and see if there's any updates. And if there are, then basically update your system. Try to keep your systems up to date. There's a lot of security fixes that usually go into those updates. And last but not least, don't assume your services and your accounts are safe. They aren't. Try to minimize what data is out there that could, basically be very harmful if it got out. And try not to keep. Well, everybody likes to put their or ask for birth dates. Don't use your real birth date, for instance. Right? Never, ever, ever put out your SIN number. Right? Your SIN number is for your employer and your bank.
Your
right?
taxes.
Your taxes. There's nobody else should have your SIN number. Nobody. And if they ask for it, you say no. Right? So limit access to what make up something if they're asking for it. Right? You don't need to share that with anybody. It's by law. Right? So use those common sense things, and don't trust. If somebody calls you up on and says, oh, by the way, your system's been hacked and your accounts has been compromised, and they're draining your accounts as you speak. Don't believe that, right? Hang up on them. If you're really worried about it, if you really have a sense of concern, go to that institution. Go to that particular financial institution. Talk to them face to face, right? Don't just trust anybody connecting to you, because that can be fake, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
Physically check things, and also use your number to call back. Don't use the number they give you, on the email, or don't go to the website they give you on the email. Go to your websites, are the actual vendor websites and the actual vendor numbers. So those are some of the basic things that I didn't get out, but I wanted to make sure everybody understood.
Yeah, it's like I said, just I think the message really is to become a little bit more educated as far as some of the threats that are out there, and be a little bit less complacent with the things you're doing to secure your information, your identity, and be vigilant and be always on the lookout for threats. I mean, that's not to say that you need to live in a paranoid state every day, but just be aware that things are changing rapidly out there, and that what seems real may very well not be real.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.